And now I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Leadership and Development, Building Collaborative Trust Across Your Organization. I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter today. He is a Zig Ziglar's Legacy Certified Speaker, Matt Rush. Matt, you now have the floor.
Mayanne, thank you so very much. I think you should also be an auctioneer. I've never heard anyone talk so fast in all my life, and my last name is Rush. It sounds like you've done that before.
Once or twice.
Well, it's an honor to be here today. It's an honor to have all of you here today. And I understand that this is so different than what we have been accustomed to prior to 2020, right? 2020 we thought was going to be everything perfectly in focus, and we have discovered that things got out of focus, and now we are having to get them back into focus so we can have that 2020 vision. So today's session is really one that I think is absolutely critical for us as leaders, as people, as influencers, and truly in the global society that we operate in right now. This is one of those topics that we've used a lot of this before, coming from a communication standpoint. We're going to be doing that again, but I also want to really emphasize how important it is for us to think about the things that actually build trust. And that's what this whole webinar is all about. So let's get right on into this thing. There you go. That's my ugly mug. You can see that now. A few of the objectives that we really want to cover throughout our short time today is, how do we apply communication skills across different media? How do we improve our listening skills? How do we communicate with body language, especially now that we're in a virtual environment? How do we choose a communication method? And then also, how do we communicate across our entire organizations? And all of this is really a quote communications class. But like I said before, and I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to keep saying it throughout this, I want you to start thinking about, how do we use these tips, tricks, and quote communication skills to actually build connection? Because if we're going to establish trust, the only way to do that is for us to actually build some connections with each other. In fact, I think this is so pivotal. We're working on an entire seminar, a full day event on just what builds connections with people. And this is really just that first step. Like Mayanne said, this is just a little snippet, but I hope we give you some things that you could actually use as you begin to go forward from this day on. And so I'll start off by asking a question that's not even in the objectives, it's not anywhere, but I really think this is a pivotal question to ask. And that is, what's more important, having a message or having the message heard? Obviously, it's having a message heard, because we could have the greatest message of all time, but unless that message is actually resonating with other people, it does absolutely no good whatsoever. So for us, it's how do we have an appropriate message, and how do we get that message across to our teams and to our people? So the first thing that I want to do is to emphasize the importance of having a message heard.
Hello, this is the German Coast Guard. What are you thinking about?
So obviously we can see that what is more important, having a message or having a message heard? Obviously it is absolutely more critical to have that message heard. And if we're going to build collaborative trust across an organization, we've got to figure out what are those things that can build those connections. So just a little humor to get us started on the day. And really, if we're going to go forward, we have to look at where we've come. And if we're going to build trust across an organization, if we're going to communicate more effectively, we got to look at how things have happened in the past. And theories of management proposed and studied in the early 20th century have had a lasting impact on how organizations communicate today. And new technologies notwithstanding, obviously there's been tons of new technology that has came out or has evolved or adapted, especially in the last 2-3 months. But besides that, most communication practices haven't changed much at all since the beginning of time. So that's part of what I wanted to look at, was where we came from. But now it's like the exception has become the norm, because now technology has become the #1 driver for our communication, which that's never happened before. It's always been an afterthought or a side benefit or whatever, but now it's actually become the norm. And really the classical model of communication was really this top-down command and control model, where you had content, direction, the channel, the style, you had the task, the vertical, the written, and then the formal lines of communication. I equate this to, think about like the military. The military is still truly a classical model of communication, a classical model of getting that message across. It is top down. It is, these are the things we're going to hand down, and these are the things we're going to do and why we're going to do them. Okay? What we're moving into more is a human relations communication model, where we recognize now that it's about that social nature of people in the workplace, but also then carrying it home, because now there's no separation, literally, between work and home or home and work. It's like it's all become blended together. So now this human relation communication model talks about how we have the task and the social piece. We have vertical and horizontal communication now. Prior to 3 months ago, we had more face-to-face communication that was happening. But even now, we have face-to-face, because now we're all spread over the globe. There's a whole bunch of people on here spread all over the globe, and we're still in a face-to-face dialogue. So it's just changed a little bit. But also, we know that for a fact, communication has become a lot more informal. And it doesn't take much to figure that out. I mean, we can pick up this little device right here and figure out that communication has become a lot less informal. And that poses some real problems when it comes to building trust in an organization, when it comes to delivering a message throughout an organization. And we're going to address all those as we go. So currently we have these types of communication in a workplace. And maybe you can even type it in or whatever. But right, what else do we have? Because right now we have email, we have instant messenger, we have video, we have file sharing, SMS, we have mobile phones. What other forms of communication do we have today that aren't on that list? I say there's really 3 additional forms of communication that we have today that aren't on that list that make a dramatic impact when it comes to building collaborative trust across your organization. And that is, we still have face-to-face meetings, we still have in-person meetings, we still have telemeetings, and we still have casual conversations. And when we get into these trainings, and when we get into all this stuff about trust and communication and all that, that last one is one that we very rarely mention, but it has a dramatic impact in our organizations, and that's those casual conversations. So those are 3 things that aren't on the list that really are critical to building trust. Face-to-face meetings, meetings in general, instead of just text messages and emails or whatever it might be, and then those casual conversations that happen on a daily basis that we don't give a lot of credence to, but have a dramatic impact. So some implications of all of this. The secret reality is this: the more communication platforms that you have, the more the possibilities increase for your message to be overlooked or even lost. And really and truly, the ease of sending a quick question or response can have negative consequences if the message is not actually clear. Literally, we now have so many options to send a message to people in our organizations that it now has become difficult for us to even track what we've sent, what we've said, and who's saying things to us. I can even pull up on my phone right now in front of God and everybody, and I have one folder alone with social media files. I have one folder alone with business stuff and different email addresses. I have text messages. I have note sections. I have all email. I mean, we've got so much, and we're putting so much out there, and it's in so many different forms that really we can lose trust because of so many different ways of communicating. And I hope that makes sense. I think about just conversations with my wife and I. We send text messages. We have phone conversations. She sends me emails. She sends me messages on Messenger, on Facebook. There's also some that she's seen something on Instagram and sent me something. So I mean, those are just 5 simple things right there. And a lot of times it can just become so much that then we actually lose trust because we're trying to balance and keep track of all this input that's coming from so many different directions that it breaks down or something is overlooked. And when a communication piece is overlooked, that has a direct implication on trust. I'm going to say it again. When any kind of communication is overlooked, and it may be totally unintentional, that's going to have an effect and an impact on trust, especially if it happens continually over time and sets a pattern. That's a huge thing that we've really got to try to avoid. So how do we do that? How do we avoid that so that we can keep trust first and foremost? And the first one I say is, hey, we've got to have some self-awareness here. A vital way of becoming more effective in both business and life is becoming more self-aware. And literally, if you can become more self-aware, your strengths and your weaknesses, then you can identify and you can become more aware of the effects that those have on the people that you're working with and for. So the more you're aware of what your strengths and your weaknesses are, the more you're going to be able to deal with that and have a better effect on the people that you work with and you for. So in other words, I say I can sum all this up in 3 simple little words. 3 words sum this whole class up. Yeah, they pay me to say a lot more, but I can sum it up in 3. And that's these 3 words are: get over yourself. The day you realize it's not about you, it's about that message connecting with other people, them hearing that message, that's the day everything's going to start to change. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying, because I'm not saying to think less of yourself. I'm saying to think of yourself less. When we can become self-aware of our strengths and weaknesses, then we know where we need to, the gaps we need to fill, and the strengths that we have, but then we can start to use those to be able to better connect to people. And when we get over ourselves and realize it's about our mission, it's about what we're trying to accomplish, where we're trying to go, who we're trying to attract, etc., etc. The day we get over ourselves and realize it's about all those people is the day everything is going to change in your organization. That is the day that you are going to establish an immense amount of trust within your team is when your team understands you're more concerned about the team as a whole than you are you as an individual. That I can assure you that is the day everything will change. So we're going to look at how do we do that? How do we become more self-aware? Really, it comes down to there are 4 aspects when we're talking about the total self. So one way to think about yourself and others is to really become aware of our total self. And there's 4 aspects that we all deal with when it comes to ourselves. We have our physical self, our emotional self, our mental self, and then our spiritual self. So no matter who you are, where you're at on planet Earth, those are really 4 things that make up every person. But really and truly, this is how we would like, let me rephrase that. The next video I'm going to show you, just a fun little video. And I think this sums up almost where we're at when it comes to communication and connecting with other people, because we get so frustrated about all of this. Sometimes we just go nuts about it. And this is the summation of it.
Matt, if you could, can you just bump up the volume on the video just a bit, please? Thank
Okay.
you.
If I may digress for a moment, my prepared message, I mean it when I say to you guys, sometimes you're bad. Don't be jerks. You're supposed to be good. I'm in my office every day, and somebody comes in and they're like, hey, oops, don't. Dan, what is your deal? If anybody doesn't know, Dan is the worst. I took a vow to not say who was the worst. It's Dan. You guys are making me look bad in front of God. What's that? Oh, look, it's Jesus. He said, stop it.
All right, I hope you can hear that. But honestly, sometimes when we're talking to people, sometimes we just feel like we are not connecting whatsoever. And we get so frustrated, and it becomes so internal that we're just like, we're just over it. And we get to a breaking point, and then we just lose it. And there's no way we can ever get that back. So when we're talking about our total self, literally the first thing you've got to look at is the physical self. Because if you are having any kind of issues physically, it's going to spill over to the emotional, it's going to spill over to the mental, and it's going to spill over to the spiritual. Just like in the video, the guy just loses it and it all comes out in the physical. So this is the leading driver of us, which then is the first and foremost thing that people see. So then it's the number one thing that's going to be able to connect and build that trust. Feeling physically uncomfortable can lead to feeling emotionally uncomfortable, and feeling emotional uncomfortable can lead to changes in our physical feelings. These things right here, when we physically feel neutral, awareness of the physical body can be replaced with other levels of awareness of our thoughts or of our emotions. So in other words, getting control of this allows us the opportunity to then evaluate how we're connecting, which then builds the trust. So one of my favorite things to do with this is I love giving keynotes at conferences and events. And I don't care how big the audience is. The biggest audience I've ever spoken in front of was a keynote with 8,000 people. Okay, with 8,000 people in an audience, the only people you can actually see are the people right on the front row. The first 4, 5, 10 rows, because then it becomes dark. But I know my material so well. I'm in such control of my physical self and everything that I'm going to say, that then it allows me to watch what's going on and read the audience in a way that then I can evaluate how I'm saying things in order to make those connections. So my wife says I'm crazy, which y'all probably agree with, but my wife says, how do you do that? I said, well, number one, I know my material. So I'm up there and I'm giving my material, and I don't have to physically concentrate on what is coming out next. But it allowed me at that point, here I am, 8,000 people. I can see on the front row, I can see a group of kids. There's a youth conference. I see this group of kids, and they weren't paying attention. They were chatting with each other. They were doing this little hand thing back and forth. So at that point in time, I know I need to adjust my physical self in order to build a connection with the audience. So then I dropped my voice. I went down on one knee. I got really serious and I got really quiet when I was making this point. It became so uncomfortable because I, as the presenter, became so aware of my physical self that then they become aware of their physical self. And then we were able to proceed on. So you can use this in great, powerful ways. We'll even talk about voice in a little bit. So the next one is the emotional self. And being aware of one's emotions is huge. And I want you to write this down on a piece of paper somewhere. I want you to write it down because it is absolutely true. And that is, emotion will override fact every time. In other words, if you're in charge of your physical self, you're in charge of the facts. But then if there's an emotion that becomes involved, emotion will always trump and override facts. And I say, hey, if you don't believe this, get into an argument with your significant other or someone that you report to. And if it's an argument and there are emotions involved and you start throwing out data points, who's going to win? Obviously, the emotions always win. So the second piece that we have to build trust is we've got to be in control of our emotions. We have to be aware of them. Emotions also often get undervalued. In any kind of culture or logic and reason, emotion really, we don't address it. And it's a lot of a cultural thing too, especially in business. We don't want to talk about emotions in business, and yet emotion is the one driver that really overrides everything. So emotions serve as an important purpose in providing the self with information about your environment, as well as motivation for what to avoid and embrace in that environment. We cannot avoid feeling emotions, but we can intervene through our actions and change how we react to those emotions. For me, this is the pivotal point where we need to concentrate on how we respond versus how we react. A response has maybe even a 30-second, maybe it's even a 15 seconds delay to get our emotions in check so that we don't react. Because when we react, then it can have a direct impact on the trust factor. Okay, so the fourth piece, the mental self. How many of you have ever laid awake at night and you couldn't shut your brain off? You get awake in the middle of the night and then the most random stuff starts happening. I mean, the mental aspect of yourself concerns your thoughts and your imagination. Like the physical and the emotional feelings, thoughts also have to have the capacity to control you. And when people think, they often think in sentences or words, but just as often they can think in images or words and phrases that act kind of like as a shorthand. In these moments, it is quite easy for thoughts to get distorted and not accurately reflect a true situation. How many of you, outside of waking up in the middle of the night and having crazy thoughts, How many of you have ever worried or got concerned about something that you know has a 99.9% chance of never actually happening? Yeah, we've all been there. We've all done it. We've all gotten so wrapped up in our thoughts that we run off down these rabbit trails and into ways and into things that we know probably are never going to happen. So it's a huge driver. The next one is then the spiritual self. And the spiritual self is a realm of what a person values. It's the worldviews and the source of motivation for us. It's different for everyone. It's a different level or a different depth for everyone. The spiritual self is about the interconnectedness of thoughts and feelings over time that actually form our personal identity, that sense of personal identity that we have. So those are the 4 elements to ourself that we've got to consider when we're talking about building trust with other people. It starts with us first. If we can identify those 4 things and start to identify them in other people, it's going to go a long way in building that trust. So as you look at yourself and your team, there's really 2 ways to start thinking about all this. There's really 2 types of thinkers. There's the global thinker and the linear thinker. And we've done an entire video series. You can have access. You can get access to it, dealing with different personalities. And there's 4 different personalities. We're not going to go into them in this session, but we would in a live event because it really is really critical on building trust. There's the people that have a dominant personality. Those are the direct people, the doers, the ones that are going to tell you and then expect something. There's the influencers. We use the DISC model, so dominant, then the influencers. Those are the outgoing people, the people that talk with their hands all the time. They are people. Then there's the steadiness people. These are the people that just want everybody to get along. They're the worker bees. They're the ones that look, everything's calm on the surface, and they just want everyone to get along and work towards a purpose, but they're more introverted. And then there's the conscientious people. And those are the people that want everything done specifically and in order. They're reserved, but they want the task done in order. So those are the 4 different personality types. But for the sake of today and thinking about trust, I wanted to think about the global thinker versus the linear thinker and just keep it down to these 2 things. Because within these 2 things, the global thinker is the person who's really more concerned about the theory or the concept behind something. The big picture thinker. And the linear thinker is the person that thinks more in details than in the big picture. They tend to think about the step-by-step process. So if you're going to build trust, just start looking at the people you work with and for, and you think about the people that you're even coming in contact with video conference wise now, and isn't it pretty easy to identify those 2 types of people? The big picture people, the big picture thinking people, and then the step-by-step people. So what's the difference? One way to think about the difference between the global thinker and the linear thinker is imagine you're giving a toy that's in 1,000 pieces and it needs to be assembled. If you're a global thinker, you're the type of person that just wants to look at the picture and get started. The linear thinker wants to get the instructions out and read the instructions. While neither approach is wrong, in group projects, global thinkers tend to work well with and prefer working with other global thinkers, while linear thinkers tend to want to work more with linear thinkers. But what problems does that cause in trust? The problem it causes in building trust is we get with our own group of people and then we start not wanting to even identify with someone else. So then how do we address the different styles? Global thinkers will appreciate each other's willingness to see the big picture. Linear thinkers will work together to build the step-by-steps required to reach a solution. When one person thinks differently from another, this different thinking style can not only seem foreign, but sometimes it can even become what you think is irrelevant. And while you may be aware of your thinking style, the people you're working around may not be aware of their own style. They may not know what their style is. Okay, that's when you're going to have to get over yourself and understand you need to adapt to who? You or them. Obviously, it's how do you adapt to them? So to adapt to them, if you're a global thinker, just for the sake of building some trust, try breaking your big picture stuff down into a series of really discrete incremental steps. And if you are that linear thinker, then look at the end result and use that as the basis of your discussion instead of just, well, what's the first step we've got to take? So really, that's really how we can just start to break these things down into two different categories of people, and then how we can start to communicate differently so that we can actually truly get over ourselves and have some of that trust built to then be able to talk to them. And it's really about this interpersonal awareness. So as you develop a greater degree of self-awareness, you will also become more aware of the dynamics at play in your interactions with other people. Getting over yourself. When you have a greater awareness of your thinking, your learning, and your personality styles, you also have a responsibility to be more adaptable in your interactions with other people then. I say the biggest thing that we can do then, and this goes back to my grandma. My Granny Rush, she was a sage. She could give the greatest little tidbits of information. And she used to say, all right, Matthew, you have 2 ears and 2 eyes and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that ratio. You should be doing a lot more looking and listening than talking. So one of the best ways to build trust across an organization is to just start to listen. And there's some real key points here when it comes to listening that are going to build trust like you've never seen built before. Because when you're listening, you listen to listen. Step number 1. Multitasking, absolutely not. Don't talk on your phone. Don't text. Don't try to do something else. Don't be cleaning off your desk. Just listen. When my nephew was probably 3 years old, he was trying to tell me a story, and we're in the living room and a bunch of people around, and I'm trying to listen to the adult conversation, holding him in my arms, not really paying attention to what he's saying, but I'm holding him, listening to the adult conversation. And then a little bit, the little guy takes his 2 little hands and he grabs my cheeks and he turns and he looks and he goes, Uncle Matt, listen to me. Like, he could tell I was not actually listening. So can your people in your organization. If you want to build trust, listen. Avoid interruptions. If you think of something else that needs to be done, okay, great. Make a mental note of that, but don't interrupt them and don't stop them to document that. That's on you. So don't. I say aim to spend at least 90% of your time listening and only 10% of your time talking. If the world did that, if every person on planet Earth took that philosophy, wouldn't we have a lot better society? Wouldn't we solve a lot of the problems that are going on right now if we just listened? I say when you do talk, make sure it's related to what the other person is saying. I've got ADD, ADHD, I got them all, and they fight for attention. Okay, when I'm having a conversation with someone, I have to then mentally check myself to make sure that when I respond, it's actually what the person is talking about. I have started to respond and had to stop myself and say, I apologize. That has nothing to do with what you were saying. Okay, if you can do that, what are you telling that other person at that point in time? You're telling that other person that you actually want to hear what they have to say, and your response back is related to that. Huge way to build trust. So the next one, don't offer advice unless they ask for it. You can ask at the end of a conversation, now, do you want my advice or did you just want me to listen? My wife tells me all the time when she comes in and she starts talking about stuff at work, and then afterwards, I'm a fixer guy. I'm like, okay, honey, so you should, what do you do this and this and this and this, and I start doing all this stuff here, right? I go into speecher man mode, and she's multiple times has said, time out. I don't need your advice. I just needed you to listen right now. I don't need speaker man. Just listen to me. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. I'll get over myself. It's not about what I can say back. It's what you're actually trying to say. So don't offer advice unless they want it. And then make sure the physical environment is conducive to listening. If it's not conducive to listening, change it. Tell people, look, I apologize. This is so noisy here. I can't actually hear what you're saying well. What if we change the environment? I mean, you can come right out and say it straightforward. How is that going to address trust? And then the last one, if it is a conversation where you are required to take notes, try not to let the note taking disrupt the flow of the conversation. I'll even go so far as to say, when you're in that situation where you have to take notes, try not to use this. And I love this little feature, this little notes feature on my phone. I've got a gajillion of them on here. I love it because I can type into here, then it's back on my computer later, and it's just, but what does this have the perception of? If someone's talking and I'm doing this, the perception is absolutely, even if you come out and say, do you mind if I take notes on my phone? They're going to say yes, but inside the perception is going to be a question about whether or not you're actually doing that. So I say, hey, if you can take notes, just do them on real paper. Okay, so those are 7 ways to listen better. Now, how do we speak in a more effective manner? I say the sweetest sound to anybody's ear is the sound of their own name. The sweetest voice, the sweetest note to anyone's ear is the sound of their own name. So use the person's name when you're responding to them. Use inclusive language. We don't hit that enough. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do in society right now is use that inclusive language. And use we and us and as our team. Manage your tone. This one is huge, and we'll even hit on it a little more in a little bit. But your tone is paramount to control. Try to have a natural smile, and there's nothing that can close the spirit off with somebody's got a genuine smile to something that you're saying. Don't force it, but just smile and be attentive to the silence. If silence becomes an issue, then you take control and say, can I repeat back to you what I just heard you say? Or are you ready for me to respond, or do you have more that you would like to say? But bottom line is just be polite. Couldn't the world just use a whole pile of that right now? Just be polite. And when we're talking about this thing, and it's really an issue right now, and it's causing some problems in trust, which is one reason we're addressing it today, and that is whole body communication. In 1971, Albert Mehrabian published a famous study called Silent Messages. In it, he made several conclusions about the spoken word, how it is received. Although this study has been misquoted often throughout the years, its basic conclusion is that 7% of our message is verbal, 38% is paraverbal, we'll explain that in a little bit, and then 55% is from body language. Now, we know that this is not true in all situations. If someone is speaking to you in a foreign language, you cannot understand 93% of what they're saying. Or if you are reading a written letter, you're likely to get more than 7% of the sender's message. What this study does tell us is that body language is a vital part of communication with others. It is a vital part of our connections with other people. It's a vital part of how we build trust with other people. So let's break each one down. Verbal communication. This is all about the words we use. We've heard it said, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That is a lie. That is an absolute 100% lie. Verbal communication is powerful. Even though 7% of all communication is verbal, it's still really powerful. We've also heard this saying before too, that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And yet cameras and photography has only been around since 1826. So we're still reading and being impacted by things that have happened since the beginning of time. So while verbal communication is only 7%, it is also incredibly powerful and impactful if it's used in a correct manner. If it's not used in a correct manner, it is destructive and can tear someone down. Absolute. So I don't want to get away from that. I want to emphasize how important it is when it comes to building trust that we pay attention to the words we use. Okay. Now let's use the paraverbal. This is how we say those words. So 7% is just the words, 38% are the actual words themselves, or how we say the words. This is I call it the VIP model. This is the voice, the inflection, and the pace. When you can control your tone, your volume, your emphasis on your words, when you can take it to a VIP level, it's when you can become a true professional at delivering those words in such a way that while they may not have a huge impact, the manner you deliver them can drive a point home and emphasize something with power. So then let's go to the last piece, which is body language. And the reason I want to hint on this is because we're in a point right now in our world where it's kind of been taken away from us to an extent. Or at least that's a perception, which we all know perception is reality. So then I guess my question is, how in a technology-driven age, how do we deal with body language? What have I been using since this whole thing began? One of the biggest complaints we had after the last session was the video wasn't up. And because of lag time, we finally took it down, but everything's gotten better. I think all these platforms have increased their bandwidth, so now video's keeping up with our mouth, because otherwise it becomes such a distraction. But last time, that was the biggest complaint we had was, hey, we couldn't see you talking. So in other words, we may have a perception that body language has changed, and yet even though we're doing webinars and we're connecting through a device or technology, it still plays a dramatic and a huge role in the way that we connect with people, in a way we build trust with people. And so with all that being said, now more than ever, written conversations have become critically important, have become a lot more important. In the past, we've always had time to process some of these things, but now that everything is so instantaneous, these three levels of communication, our words, are the way we deliver on them, and then our body language, they've kind of started, I think, blending more equally together. Because now those written words, because of technology, have changed how we actually receive messages. And there's some huge challenges to that too. The instant messaging platforms, we all know that there's these little emojis now that they throw on there so that they're trying to address the issue of not being able to convey emotions in our words. So we know that words have power. We know the way they're delivered is powerful, and we know that the body language you use is powerful. So now in a technology age where we're relying on instant messaging, text messaging, and in email more than ever, I just wanted to give you a few basic rules that maybe would help that be more impactful, to build some trust with people. So the number one, how would you interpret a message before you send it? You think about the person that's going to receive that message. Ask yourself, how is this going to be interpreted? Are there emotions attached to it that they may not get? Okay, do they understand some of the technology or the what I'm trying to say is, like, do they understand that if you put something in all caps, that actually means you're yelling? Some people don't get that, right? I mean, my mom likes to send all caps all the time. I'm like, Mom, why are you yelling at me? She goes, I'm not. I'm like, go and take your caps out, right? So they don't know. Some people may not know how it's going to be sent. So you need to ask yourself, how is it going to be received? Next question, do you share the same cultural bias with the person you're communicating with? I've been having two conversations right now with a person in the Philippines and another person in Kenya. Okay, there are cultural differences in some of the things that I have said. They've come back and questioned and they've wondered about, and I'm like, okay, let's clear that up on a cultural basis. So ask yourself, do you share that, and do you need to address that? Do your emojis add or subtract from the content? Because we also know those people that like to overuse those little buttons, right? And then lastly, could your message be misinterpreted? When it comes to building trust, that's probably one of the biggest questions you could ask yourself is, could your message be misinterpreted? Organizational awareness. As we start to put a bow on all this and bring this all together, being aware of your organization means you know how information flows. You familiarize yourself with the strategic direction of the organization. You've become attuned to the culture in your organization. And the reality is fitting it into that middle piece is what's important. So we'll ask the question, why does culture matter? Because culture defines how people act in an organization. It defines how they communicate. It really goes to the heart and soul of what we're having to deal with now. Prior to COVID, my main thing was being in public and being in front of you publicly, because I felt like I could bring a culture into a room or into your organization, to your business, and help get a message across. But now it's different. So we have to address that and understand then, how do we leverage culture to make that, to build that trust and make for more effective communication. I say to the understanding of process and people interaction, this, when we can understand those two things, process and people, number one, it builds a great amount of trust, but it also it shows us who communication should be sent to for maximum effectiveness. It shows the best form across your organization for communication. It shows how a hierarchy plays a role in your communication. So when you can identify those things and look at your organization, you then are willing, that's when I say, hey, you're getting over yourself. You're understanding, it's the definition of maturity. I understand my natural tendencies well enough, but I know it can't always happen naturally, and I'm willing to accept responsibility for that. So I can identify that culture, I can look at it, and then I know how I can start delivering my messages and carrying myself forward so that then we have the ability to communicate more effectively. Because if you can communicate more effectively, it impacts the level of stress in your organization. It impacts relationships between your coworkers, the level of engagement within the organization, productivity, and your ability to solve problems and or meet goals. So that is a huge ability to build trust with people. There are some factors that are going to affect communication. The method used in communication has a huge impact. Is it person to person? Is it telephone? Is it email? Is it messenger? Is it a text? The number of people receiving the message can have a great impact on communication. The audience receiving the message can be impacted, can be a huge factor in communication. So when we're starting to look at building trust, we need to look at the method, the mass, and the audience before we start trying to deliver a message, before we start trying to connect with other people. Why is this important? A really dear friend of ours was the CEO of a former huge corporation. I won't say the name. Huge corporation. He was a CEO for a number of decades. He had been retired for 10 years, but he was like he was an icon within this Fortune 500 company. And when he passed away, because he was still so connected to the organization, someone sent an internal email out to 500 employees in the corporate office saying that he had passed away. The problem with that was not all of his family knew. So the family, in their shock and bereavement and grief over this, hadn't even got the message out to everybody. And yet one person who didn't consider the method, the mass, or the audience jumped the gun and delivered something that had a huge impact on everyone. And that stuff happens, right? But it also has a direct impact on trust. So we say, hey, consider that. Consider the method, the mass, and the audience. There are some barriers that you're going to face when it comes to communication. These barriers are going to come down to these things right here: language and culture, location, distance. But now we've got technology, we've got people's backgrounds, we're dealing with different time zones. Now we have all these barriers that we have to deal with as well. So when it comes to trust, we do have to identify some of these things. And really, we have to be able to plan how we're going to communicate with other people. We have to take the time to understand how people prefer to be communicated to. We have to be willing to get over ourselves and adapt our style. And then if something isn't working, we have to find out why and be willing to change it. And that may be just looking in the mirror. But communicating across your organization, there's going to be new technologies and modalities that require more soft skills, not less. Just remember our motto here: human first, technology second. Being self-aware, interpersonal skills, understanding your organization are keys to being an effective communicator. Putting these skills into practice will have a direct benefit on your team, your people, and across your organization. And every area that we have discussed, every skill we have explored, are all things that can be learned, can be improved, can be cultivated. And when you're willing to get over yourself and do these things, the level of trust that brings to your people and to your organization and your team is so dramatically improved that you're going to stand out, whether that be to the people you report to or the people that report to you. When you're willing to address all these things, start to look at how you can use them to communicate more effectively, then we know that trust is going to go up exponentially. And that's when we know we can truly build collaborative trust across our organizations. That being said, we're going to open it up to questions. There's a few things that we know we want to get across that New Horizons. We've been teaching this virtual live training since 2001. So this is nothing new to us. It's just become the normal now. So we've got a ton of stuff. We still love the face-to-face, and we're excited about that getting going. Then afterwards, you're going to get all kinds of post-class resources. We're so grateful that you were here today. And now, Mayan, I'll open it up. Does anyone have any questions in our last few minutes here before we go?
Thank you so much. I'll give folks a minute here just to type in some questions that they may have. Just want to reiterate some of the things that you were saying. Yes, this class, this webinar, it's just a small, if you're interested in what we presented in this webinar, if you have questions just regarding what's available to you, please contact your local center for further information. You can log on to newhorizons.com and do a quick zip code search for the center nearest you. Also, our webinar schedule is up to date on our website, so please feel free to register for other sessions that we may have that are coming up. And lastly, a friendly reminder that we'll be sending out the recording link to today's session here, so you can pass it along to anyone that you feel would benefit from it, someone who's missed it, and if you wanted to review it. So jumping into questions here, the first one is, the person says, the thing that turns me off in regards to trusting others are memes, because it's just short-sighted and it doesn't consider the other side. Have you found this to degrade trust at all?
Oh, I think that's really personal. Like some people, and okay, this is way personal here. I love them. I think they're fun. I understand that some people aren't going to like that. So then I know that I'm going to have to adjust when I use them with other people. If you find them degrading or you don't like them, is it worth you addressing with that person? Is it going to hurt trust if you address it with them? versus if you just say, okay, I get it. It's the world we live in now. I don't particularly, it's my personal style. I don't like it. So yeah, that one's up. That I get it, but yeah, I like them. So I'm like on the other side of that. I have to evaluate how I use them. I know not everybody's going to do that. So I would just ask those two questions. Is it worth me addressing? Is it going to hurt trust if I address them? Do I just need to understand that that's their form of communication, and it's just my personal that I don't like it. Does that make sense?
It does. Another question is, my company is mostly remote now. Is there a certain way to engage with leaders that do not like to share video during calls? I communicate much better when I see someone face to face.
Oh, me too. Oh my goodness, me too. So now the people who don't like it, and I know I like it. So there are times that I have to check myself and say, okay, I get it that they just don't like that. But I've also started asking the question, would you mind if we had a video chat? I would really appreciate it if we could just have some, quote, face-to-face time. Would you mind if we had a video chat or a video meeting? Would that be something we could do? And maybe that's a way to open it up to where you can actually start having some connections that are actually your preference occasionally, so that you can, quite frankly, so that you can be okay, and you can fill your own cup that way. So that would be my suggestion, is ask if it's okay to do that occasionally.
Great. Another question that came in is, as part of my job, I need to present remotely. I'm used to doing this in person, but find it really hard to adapt my communications when I can't see whether people are listening or how they are responding. Do you have any tips?
Let me tell you, I feel your pain because we've just been talking for an hour now, and I couldn't see any response from any people. I love that interaction. I thrive off that interaction. So now, one of the things that I would suggest is record your presentation. If you've got to present remotely, record it in advance. And then you watch it back yourself so that you can see where you're connecting and not. You're going to be your worst critic, right? I mean, you probably, even the thought of that probably makes you want to cringe. Get over yourself, record it, watch it back. And I even say watch it back 4 different ways. Watch it back with no sound so that you can see your body language yourself. Watch it back with no sound, with just sound so you can hear how you sound. Watch it in 1.5 speed. So speed it up so you can see if there's any ticks or tricks or something you're doing that gets a little crazy, and then watch it back normal. In any kind of presentation, I say do those 4 things because it can help you a lot, especially if you're not getting the feedback that you would normally get in a live presentation. So those are just 4 things that I do that maybe would help you get prepared to do that presentation in a remote environment. And if it's a long presentation, okay, just record the first 15 minutes of it. Record a piece, a segment of it, just so you can see how you're coming across on camera, quite frankly.
Great. I know we're hitting the top of the hour here. One last question here. How do you have the conversation with someone if you are super sensitive to tone? The person I'm referring to is someone who's a close peer, but has no idea their tone can be condescending at times and sound negative. With working remote, it seems to be bothering me even more now. I've had the conversation in the past by just asking if they were upset. I really don't think he understands that he comes across this way.
Ooh. So I think this is one is personal as well, because this is something my wife and I deal with. I'm very tonal. She's very reserved. Obviously, you could probably tell I get a little crazy. So we had to have that conversation. So that was a little bit differently. I would suggest that if you have a supervisor, if that person reports to somebody else, maybe you could go talk to them and say, hey, this is an issue I'm dealing with, and ask them. I typically, when somebody is like that, they're usually okay with you just coming and being direct with them and saying, I got to ask you a question. Typically, I would say that person is dominant, because you got the dominant, the influencer, the steadiness, and the conscientious. So I would say that person typically is dominant when they're really into tone. So they like it. Typically, that type of person likes for you to be a little more upfront. So just say, hey, I got to address something here that's really that's really a problem now, especially now that we're remote. Sometimes I can't understand and interpret your tone. I think you're yelling at me. I'm afraid you're upset. I address that. A lot of, and maybe you can tell whether or not that's an okay conversation to have with that person. Get over yourself, buck up, be confident, and have that conversation and tell them, hey, look, I want to keep our trust level high. So come at it from that angle. If you don't think you could have that conversation with that person, then okay, maybe you can go to the supervisor or whoever they report to and say, hey, this is something that we're all experiencing, or several of us are experiencing. How do I address it? With this, how do we bring this up? So maybe maybe that'd help.
Wonderful. With that said, thank you so much again, Matt, for presenting on behalf of New Horizons. Thank you, everyone who put in some questions. I know we're at the top of the hour. Appreciate it. Please be on the lookout for the recording later today as well. With that said, be safe. Hopefully we can see you on another session. Also you as well, Matt. You may now log off from the webinar. Thank you and have a good one, everyone.
Perfect. Have a good day. Thank you, everyone.